Welcome back to Echo Ridge and another episode here in our farm series. Today, we're going to be amping up our power production. There were a lot of comments in the last YouTube video talking about, I wonder how bad it's going to be because Echo plugged back in all the thermal aqua tuners. Well, truth be told, I spent some time off camera trying to fix some things up, but we're not doing too bad now, at least on the cooling side. The regular water tank's at 27 degrees, polluted water's at 29, brine's at 27, but the big saltwater geyser, remember this water's originally coming in at 95C, is down to 41. Slowly but steadily. I also have to start thinking about what we're going to do when we hit overflows, but that's a future Echo problem. In that meantime, I did have to turn the thermal aqua tuners off, at least for a little while. And that's because, well, basic services weren't going to be able to be applied because of things like the water sieve not having enough power, which could cause a mess in the bathroom, but also even the suits, because when the dupes can't get out, bad things start to happen. So I know I needed to do something to increase our power capacity. I thought about putting solar panels at the top of the map in the space biome, although that would be a rather large project considering we haven't even really started digging up here. Also, the fact that this asteroid gets copper meteors, ice, and slimy, and those copper meteors hit kind of hard. So I knew it was time to get into oil and petroleum. Now, we've also received some comments that some people don't like it when I just do a slideshow of sorts of showing everything I've done in the last episode. Sometimes it's unavoidable. But don't worry, we're going to build a whole system like this during this episode. But this is a rather newer design for me, and I wanted to be able to test it out before we start implementing them all around the colony. And I say that because we have a lot of clusters of oil reservoirs sitting on this planetoid that could use the same sort of system. So I used these two closer oil reservoirs and decided to try something out. The theory is pretty similar to what we've done in the past. Oil wells, when provided some water, will start pumping out some oil. The issue always tends to be, if they're not set up properly, the water that they end up holding inside the oil well will turn to steam, and of course mess up your beautiful natural gas bath. But not only are we getting the oil that we will turn into petroleum and feed to petroleum generators, we also get a bunch more natural gas. And in this case, I'm taking all that natural gas, hooking it right into our natural gas bus, and it eventually gets supplied to the natural gas generators. Now, on the subject of turning all the oil into petroleum, we've done petroleum boilers quite often, and I thought about doing another one. But because we have so many disjointed oil reservoirs everywhere, and the fact that I wanted to ship around more than 10 kilos worth of crude oil per pipe, I thought this time I would use the oil refinery and actually make it a part of these small oil industrial areas. Yeah, I don't know what to call these yet, so please help me out in the comments below. There's also quite a bit of automation going on, and it's for a few different reasons. The oil refineries can get flooded, so I don't want the oil to come up any higher than, say, this tile here. So this hydro sensor, when reaching above 500 kilos, turns the oil wells off. When it's below, they turn back on, ensuring the tank stays nice and high, at least at our current petroleum usage. The pump is not controlled by any automation. When this line needs oil, it's going to provide it. In this very specific case, because these two oil reservoirs are right here, I also started using the oil coming out of the leaky oil fissure. But there was another danger here. The crude oil coming out of here is at 326 degrees. So I wanted all that heat to be able to be absorbed by these metal tiles before heading down into the oil industrial area, and it does a fairly good job. I have it going through radiant pipes and then switching over to insulated pipes before it hits the oil refinery. You'll also notice that I'm using regular tiles and not mesh tiles, and this is important in order to keep this oil well and this oil refinery cool. Because when the oil comes out on this tile here, it naturally starts heading down this way, and since that oil is nice and fresh, it's not as hot, which will keep these buildings nice and cool. I've been running this for about 75 cycles and so far have not seen any major heat spikes that I'm concerned about. If they do happen, we'll start to have to put a cooling loop in here or something, but so far it seems completely stable. Now, we haven't used the oil refinery a lot because of the power of a regular old petroleum boiler. But as a reminder, it's taking 10 kilos worth of crude oil and turning it, well, it just got disabled, so it ruined my example. Hold on one. But it takes that 10 kilos worth of crude oil and turns it into 5 kilos worth of petroleum. And while yes, that is a 50% cut in crude oil, we're also given 90 grams per second of natural gas, which is pretty good because all that natural gas also then gets turned and produces us more polluted water. It's not like we needed more polluted water, but well, we have it now. The other issue that I was concerned about, though, that we've kind of touched on, is the fact that the oil refinery produces 10,000 DTUs worth of heat. But again, I think as long as I keep bringing in decently cooled water and ensuring that the oil flows over, we're going to be okay. You also notice that we did a double liquid lock here because, well, this is still a lot of heat that we don't want transferring into the main part of our base. So now that I've given you a sort of basic rundown of how that system works, we need to decide where we're going to put our next one. And since there's 4 oil reservoirs sitting right here, I think this is a decent spot. We could do a single setup here, which we will eventually, and then there's a triple setup here, although I would have to tame this chlorine gas vent, which we're eventually going to do so we can grow some dasher salt vines and some balm lilies. I also think this might be a good place to put in a couple of slicksters as well. As long as we can control the temp and they don't turn molten on us, it would be a great opportunity for us to check off slicksters from the critters that we need to ranch here on the farm. Which, by the way, a quick update on our newest critter to the farm, and that being the poke shells, and they're doing pretty good. Although there are still some improvements I want to make because right now the way that they are getting the polluted dirt is through a couple of sieve locations at the top and the bottom of the base, but that's not quite enough to feed all of these poke shells, at least not indefinitely. We also have an automatic dispenser that anytime I need to sweep some, the dupes will grab it and drop it off here. It's not going to be a problem for a long time because, well, we're sitting at way too much polluted dirt because there was a lot on this map to begin with. But as you know, I look for infinite sustainability, so I want to be careful. One place I might be able to add some more polluted dirt is from the rot piles and the polluted dirt that comes out of the refrigerators because we don't eat our food fast enough. Eventually, we're going to put in a whole deep freezer system because considering how many crops and critters that we're going to be running on this farm, we're going to have food coming out of our ears. I don't know where I got that statement. I don't even know how food would ever even come out of your ears, or if that's even a commonly said statement. It's weird. I'll try not to do it again. But I think in the meantime, since everything is so close, we can add a simple auto sweeper here. Oh, it'd be really good if I could also have it feed in food into at least this electric grill as well, which would help cut down a little bit on the duplicate labor. Just realized that auto sweeper does not need to be made out of steel. We'll go back to our lead and then find our polluted dirt line, which is conveniently located right here. Hook up a little bit of power and then just select polluted dirt and rot piles, and that system is done. And that reminds me that one of the videos I have on my list to do is a duplicate labor and priorities and scheduling tutorial. Because once you start getting into mid-game, it is highly important that you have enough duplicate labor for all your tasks. And in this colony, because farming and ranching is so duplicate heavy, we're going to have to make sure that we're doing everything as optimized as possible. But not to fear, we still have a lot of duplicates we're going to be adding to the colony. Hopefully at least one this episode. It's also another reason why when I'm doing these sweeps to sort of clean up the area, I'm keeping them on priority 4, so they'll get around to it whenever they do. Same thing with our wonderful sludge press down here on a priority of 4. I added this recently because we have quite a bit of mud that we have found on the colony as I continue to do more and more digging. And well, it just makes sense to turn it into dirt and polluted dirt. So I thought a great location for it was right next to our water ingest point, which also gives us the benefit of it doesn't matter if we're doing mud and turning it into water or polluted mud and turning it into polluted water. Well, our system's going to sort it out automatically. So far, this might be one of my favorite systems I've ever built because of that sort of set it and forget it ability. I just throw liquids in it and everything else is taken care of. But now back for the subject at hand. I'm probably going to need to reroute some of these wires. Well, I guess not. Lead doesn't melt until 327, and the idea is that we're going to keep this below 90, but we can at least start clearing it out. We're going to have a lot of vacuuming to do because, like many of the systems that we have to start with a complete vacuum. I did just realize all of these are still running from a transformer way over here, and I can save quite a bit of material just by putting another transformer or two up here. We're going to need one or two for our oil system anyways. I am also going to have to start insulating these lines here. I wasn't too worried about them before because the cool salt slush geyser comes out at -10. And while I don't mind heating it up a little bit, I don't want to heat it up to 90, 95 degrees because that would just cause more work for our thermal aqua tuners down here. I just realized we have another pair of oil reservoirs right here. Since we've managed to lower what used to be our old brine tank so much, we can start by putting in the bottom of our, oh, here we go again, oil industrial area. Need to make sure we don't trap any dupes, but I think this area right here might be good. Now the right side, this is the furthest right oil reservoir, so I think this right here will be the good framing of the bottom of the box. As for the top, possibly something like this. But then that's not going to be square, so yeah, that's not going to work at all for me. So we'll do something like this. I also need to build in the same liquid locks, so while keeping dupe labor in mind, it might be good to put the liquid locks here. But the majority of this area is going to be filled with oil, so you sort of need to put them towards the top. So I'm thinking up here is probably best. I'll also add a bunch of new ladder systems. I'm just not quite sure how they're going to look. And for now, we'll let the dupes be able to come in and out through here. But I think we can also just extend our tube transit network to go, say, right there. Dig up some of these things, get rid of these ladders. It'll be very nice. In fact, transit tubes don't have a melting point until 159 degrees. So there's nothing to say we couldn't have a transit tube just come right through here. But it's a little dangerous because I don't want the temperature in here to spike and then all of a sudden we have a world of problems. So we'll keep the transit tube entrance on the outside. Oh, in fact, since we're going to be doing so good on power, I can also make a return, say right here. Hook it in with another transformer. Yeah, we're probably about to make a mess here, but it doesn't matter because this is all gapped off. And eventually this liquid pump will send all of the water that drops to our water distribution system. So it's going to be fine. While the dupes are working on that, I have to show you another issue that we're going to have to contend with here in our industrial sauna. Because, well, now it's a dirty brick. The reason why is because we replaced one whole row of natural gas generators with an entire row of petroleum generators. And unlike the natural gas generators, who can pipe out their carbon dioxide, petroleum generators just dump it out. In fact, we're already up to 56 kilos worth of carbon dioxide pressure all the way up to this point. One method you could use is putting slicksters in here. And to be honest, that's not a bad idea and is sort of keeping in the tradition of the farm style playthrough. The other one I've used in the past is a door crusher, which just obliterates all the carbon dioxide anyways. The issue with the slicksters is, well, they produce oil and stuff, but I don't think that's such a bad thing. I do wonder, though, if the slicksters would be hungry enough to eat all this carbon dioxide. But I think if we put a nice little egg system in here, it would certainly help. All the excess slicksters, even though they're not being groomed and wouldn't eat as much carbon dioxide, would still eat some. Now, just looking at this flat out, this is probably too small of a stable, but if I keep going, we have 99 tiles, so I'd only have to eat up 3. And since I need enough room to be able to add the extra slicksters, I'm thinking about just extending the bottom here. This will still be enough room for the duplicants to be able to get in and out of here. And then I can drop this and maybe move this gas reservoir around a little bit. Over on the large oil industrial area, I've started putting in the liquid lock and we're putting in the gas pumps now. It's going to take a month of Sundays to vacuum this place out, so it's a good thing that we're starting to work on that Slickster ranch. And so far, this is how it looks. I've managed to build this whole thing out, and that way we're not breaking out all these wonderful gases and letting some of the other ones in. Although there are a couple of errant pieces of polluted oxygen, and by that I mean 67 kilos. I don't know how it got in here, but it's here. We're just gonna deal with it. So now I just have the fun job of boring this back out, and then I'll end up putting another row of aluminum metal tiles. Of course, it's probably not needed because no water hits that area. And then of course we'll have to add some more temperature shift plates because, well, just because. And at first attempt, it looks like we ended up at a room that is 92 tiles. So I need 4 more tiles from somewhere. And I think I found them. I can drop this metal tile down a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that should do it. As I was building out this room here to make sure we still had our natural gas flow, I wanted to point out something that is important in the design here. This oil refinery was not able to work for a little while, and our petroleum buffer tank was empty. And the reason why is because there was more than 5 kilos worth of natural gas inside this tank. So you need to make sure that you never have more than 5 kilos worth of pressure. But at long last, we finally have a 96 tile stable, so let's start building it out. Love Slicksters because they really don't take much, because the food that they're eating comes from the environment, so it ends up just being a grooming station and a critter drop-off. And I kinda wanna make sure the Slicksters don't come over here because it'd be a lot easier to maintain them. But if that's the case, I would need to move all of this once again, which I think I'm gonna have to do, because then I'll be able to drop this floor just a little bit so I can put our door system here so the Slicksters have to stay in this little area. There we go. 96 tile, and we have 1 auto sweeper that'll be able to pick up any and all Slickster eggs. I had to remove the other gas reservoir though because I'm gonna need to put in some incubators. I think 2 will be fine, and we won't even have to power them. And then I can even use an auto sweeper in here, as long as it's not touching the automation wire, that'll pick up the eggs we drop off and automatically load them in the incubator. Now because of the temperature in here is sitting at 150, and that's only because we put in so many new buildings and pipes, normally it gets even a little higher. So eventually these will all be molten Slicksters. And I say all that because when we put in our pump, we're going to need to make sure to filter whether it's oil or petroleum. Because even if we're only running moltens, there will still be the occasional regular Slickster down here creating oil. So that's where our wonderful liquid filter comes into play. Question is, where do we put it? Suppose I really don't need this ladder, they can hop over, or I can just stop being lazy and put it right here. Yeah, this'll work. Make sure we make it out of steel. I realized another issue I don't want to happen is if this place ever gets cool enough, which it should never, there could be polluted water or regular water that ends up in this liquid pump. I already moved some of these liquid vents over, that way they all hit these tiles first, which instantly flashes them into steam, but we're gonna have to keep an eye on that. And while we could do the work to sort of prevent that altogether by putting in multiple liquid filters, I think we'll just file that under future echo problem. And here's what that setup's gonna look like. Liquid filter is gonna take any crude oil, send it over here, where it'll be processed into petroleum. If it is anything else, or in this case we're just hoping it's just petroleum, it's gonna be fed to this petroleum generator. Because of directional stuff, I didn't want to add it to the main loop, which probably would have been a little bit smarter, but this was just too clean of a system. But whenever you have 2 paths into an input, problems can sort of happen. In fact, we can even put a nice buffer tank, because you know I have a sort of kink for buffer tanks, and that's all the oil and petroleum sort of solved. Now let's just go get some Slicksters. I'm also adding in the rail system that will drop off all the eggs right into this area here. And my auto sweepers still need a little bit of power. And so does the pump. How's this line looking? Oh yeah, we have plenty of load capacity. Now the only Slicksters I can find on the map are down here, which is not too big of a deal because we can just bore through this area. It's gonna make a little bit of a mess, but we don't really care because the entire bottom of the mess has been a cesspool where we're just slowly pumping it into our system. Oh, look at that. We're about to celebrate cycle 1000. Everybody get your party hats on. Let's do this. And here we are. Yay! Thank you, Save, for ruining the perfect clip. Oh my goodness, I just found another cool slush geyser down here. This place has more water than I've ever seen on any single map. But the good news is there's a lot more fossil and diamond, not to mention some lead in here. This is gonna be delicious. Yeah, and the spore kid, I just don't care. We're just gonna go uproot it. I'm not worried about any stinking zombie spores, but we will hit the whole biome with a quick wrangle. And look at this, we finally have a completed vacuum, and I may or may not have forgotten to turn off the bottle emptier. Oops. Let's mop a little bit of that up, and then get rid of all these, because what's the worst that could happen? I'm sure I'm not going to break the vacuum. And then we can just put down some oil wells. Now, it's important to note that when you're doing this, you'll notice to have these little tiles here. Some of the oil wells, like these two down here, are eventually going to be completely submerged, so they're not a big deal. But if I were to, for instance, put this here, the oil well would drip, and the oil would start to pool here. It would still go over this side, but the building itself wouldn't be getting hit with fresh oil. That's why you always put them this way, especially for the ones that are not going to be submerged. There's 2, there's 3, and there is 4. Another great note is even a lead oil well doesn't overheat until 2000 degrees, and by that point it would have long melted, but we're never going to see 327 in here, so we can use basically whatever material you want. The next big issue is water. Each oil well requires 1 kilo's worth. I do have our main water line here, but right now I have max capacity of 4 kilos here because the electrolyzers each use 1 kilo. I have a pair of them here and even another one here. And that's not to mention I'm also feeding these oil wells. Now, I don't think those oil wells are going to be running flat out, but needless to say, if they were, the 10 kilo max flow rate wouldn't exactly cut the mustard. And there's another one of those sayings, cut the mustard. Who came up with that? But long story short, while we may be limited at first, I think we are just going to pull off of this main line in a 50-50 split. And that way our electrolyzers are still getting what they need as well. Another important note, as soon as you do get inside the oil reservoir, you want to make sure all of this is insulated because that water would have a tendency to boil. Of course, I do have room in here for another water line. Maybe that's smarter. I could then have an entirely separate water bus that I'll be able to tie in the future. Man, this is a lot of materials. And perhaps I just use the regular clean water supply right here. And I suppose I need to start sorting some more of this brine. Right now, nothing's connected here, but I don't want to put it directly into this bus. Maybe I could do a 50-50 split of sorts. So I'll connect it in, have some of it going down, and then some of it going up and around, sort of like this. And then I'll bring this line up, and because I know it's always going to be water, I will just drop it right here. Yeah, that's a lot of piping. So just to keep everybody straight, we have 1 water line being supplied by the brine and salt water, and then we have 1 clean water line being supplied from the water tank itself, which we also have access to all this polluted water we could start sieving and send over there if our levels get too low. And now I need to fast forward for a little bit and let the dupes finish all those tasks. And apparently they did it a little too quick because I did not want to turn these oil reservoirs on quite yet. I don't think they're hooked up with power, so nothing too much to worry about yet. Now this system here does need its own power line because each oil well will be 240 watts, plus we need a gas pump to get rid of some of that natural gas. Luckily for us, we pre-planned. Lead wires is all we're going to be using. And then we'll add the gas pump. This is probably going to be a good enough spot. And luckily, because we've been doing such a good job with these little bus systems, I already have a natural gas bus right here. I just realized I'd never finished taming this one. There's a whole lot of natural gas in there we could use. So we'll just be able to put in 1 quick line right here, and all that natural gas will go with the rest of it. One thing I'd like to see Clay do is allow us to color code some of these pipes. While it wouldn't help me immensely in all cases because I don't see a lot of colors, I could change like the natural gas pipe to be yellow, the oxygens to be white. Now for our petroleum, because it doesn't really make sense for us to send all this oil over to this system when we can refine it in this system here. and then just ship the petroleum itself. So we'll start off with a couple of mesh tiles, but the question is, where do we want to put it? I'd say right here is probably good. Little oil refinery, lots of pipes in here. And then we'll have our liquid pump down here at the bottom if I can find a single space. This seems to be good enough. And then we'll bring all of the crude oil up, except it really doesn't need to be insulated. So let me fix all that. The only thing that needs to be insulated in here is the water. And then once it's refined, we can send all the petroleum out. Now that petroleum will be hot, so we're about to spend a lot in resources getting the petroleum line all the way over here. And I'm sure at some point we'll be adding a whole lot of buffer tanks to this system, even though the oil industrial complex is sort of its own buffer tank. So it's nothing we have to worry about too much. I do have one liquid reservoir in here to have a little bit of extra petroleum, and it is connected to some automation that does turn the oil refinery off. But the other way you could do it is, if this pipe is full, the oil refinery is just going to stop anyways. The reason why I did it this way is because I didn't want the dupe labor to be coming over here or when we hit just one available blob of petroleum. Sort of saves a little bit on dupe labor. And likewise, I probably need to be doing the same thing over here. So I will put another buffer tank right there. And then instead of having it leave through there, it'll go out. And oh boy, here we go again. Look, it's a little spaghetti-like. I fully admit that. But it's going to work fabulously. And now for some of the little bit more complicated to this process, and that's the automation. We're just going to hook up the oil refinery directly to the liquid reservoir, put it on something like 90-70, and this works the same way as it does with the batteries. The oil refinery will turn on if the buffer tank is less than 70% full, and it'll keep going until it's 90. In fact, we don't even have to worry about the fluctuations there. We could go all the way to 100. We typically set batteries as a higher of 90 because by the time they get the automation signal, in this case, for instance, the petroleum generators are still going to fire one more time, which would then send the batteries up over the 20 kilojoules, wasting all that extra power. But we really don't have to worry about that with buffer tanks. And then just a little automation for the gas pump. Because this line is so long, I don't have to worry about it too much. It in itself represents another sort of buffer tank. So hopefully we do not get too backed up here. And so for now, I'm just going to make sure that there's always a little bit of natural gas in here because it'll help maintain the thermals up here. And I just realized I've made a mistake with this. In my last system, I had the oil cooling the oil refinery. In this one, it's not set up that way. I have to move this whole thing down here. There we go. That's a little bit better. Now this oil well, it's going to drip through here, cooling this oil well. It'll drip down, continue on this way, and then finally come down through this mesh tile. That way, it'll keep the oil refinery cool. It also means, just like in the other system, I need to put a hydro sensor in here to make sure the oil refinery doesn't get flooded. Because while the oil wells can operate flooded, the oil refinery cannot. So the final piece of automation that we have to put in is connecting all of these oil wells to this hydro sensor. I think we're ready to connect all these oil wells and make sure and see how everything does. I think we have all the meat and potatoes in. I suppose the last thing we really need to do is connect this line all the way over here. Oh, this one's going to be a stubborn one. I suppose it's probably a little easier to go up this way because there's not as many lines. Well, I say that, and here we go. That's not too bad. It's a lot of material, but the system looks somewhat clean. Now we'll just professionally place all these bridges, and we're rocking and rolling. I have the Atmos sensor set on to above 2 kilos, so it's not going to draw out any of the natural gas until then. And look how good this system looks. All that oil's dripping down here, keeping this oil refinery nice and chill. And you may have noticed when we were running the pipes that our Slicksters are now at home. Eventually they'll all turn into moltens because regular Slicksters, when their body temperature is between 100 and 250, will start laying more molten larva eggs, which is fine by us. For right now though, I am running the 2 incubators, getting as many regular Slicksters up and going for the simple reason, well, the carbon dioxide keeps climbing. And if it climbs too high, we're going to end up stifling all of our steam turbines, and that would be not good. Makes me wonder, Can I use a critter condo for the Slicksters? We're gonna try, because that would mean I could get more Slicksters in here, consuming more carbon dioxide. So maybe we'll say 10 critters? The last thing I wanted to mention about the Slicksters that you have to keep an eye on is there's been a long-term bug that I'm not 100% sure has been fixed yet, and it has to do with gas-consuming critters. Sometimes they just will stop consuming it, or they won't be consuming the correct amounts. If you've heard any updates on that particular bug, please also let me know in the comments below. And there it is, our first bit of petroleum leaving our new large oil refinery complex. Seriously, help me. And this wouldn't be Echo Ridge Gaming without at least one goof, and it's because I built the liquid pump out of aluminum ore. Stand by. And as promised, it looks like the last pot of the day has given us a prospective Devon. Yeah, they only do farming, and to be quite honest, I don't love building in paired. I was also looking at this Marie because they have husbandry, but they can't do building errands at all. But especially with the new work going to be required at the oil wells, the oil refinery, and now having Slicksters online, we need more dupes. Welcome to the farm, duplicate number 20, the Beastie. I've rather enjoyed building this system because I've never had a colony with 6 oil wells. Normally, you sort of stop at 3 because each oil well gives you 3.3 kilos worth of crude oil, which means 3 of them is going to give you a full 10 kilo pipe worth of crude oil. Well, with 6 of them online now, we now have a throughput of 20 kilos worth of oil. So I don't think power is going to be an issue anymore. So these aqua tuners can run anytime they want. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in the comments below, especially on some naming ideas for these oil and petroleum processing areas. We're also one step closer to completing the farm since we added yet another critter. We still have plenty more to go though. So until next time, much love, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon.